Okay. A very warm welcome on behalf of Germany States. It's a great pleasure for North Rhine-Westphalia to hosting you all both in Brussels and Berlin. Corona is making it necessary to do things differently and is giving us the opportunity to have a virtual meeting and also to broadcast the conference live over the internet. Let me welcome in Brussels Monsieur Jean-Éric Paquet, Director General for Research and Innovation at the European Commission, Professor Jean-Pierre Bourguignon, President of the ERC, and Mr. Thomas Estermann, European University Association, who is going to be moderating today's event. Here in Berlin, it is my pleasure to welcome Stefan Freiberg, State Secretary in the Ministry of Education, Science and Culture of the State of Mecklenburg-Western, Pomerania, the interstate representative at the Research Competitiveness Council. He is with us on video. Mrs. Professor Brigitte Wolff, Vice President of the German Rectors Conference and President of Frankfurt University. And Professor Wolff-Dieter Lukas, Permanent Secretary at the Federal Ministry of Education and Research. Ladies and gentlemen, Europe is currently faced with a multitude of challenges. The corona pandemic in particular is demanding a lot from every country and the European Union as a whole. The pressure of global competition, migration, the ecological shift in awareness of society, rapidly changing demography, technological advances, economic uncertainties, and environmental risks all require pan-European responses. With the European Green Deal, a proposal to increase the EU budget, or the digital strategy, Europe is embarking on an ambitious course towards tackling these challenges. The current pandemic is making it all too clear how important close European cooperation and cohesion is. No country can solve the great challenges of this time alone. Science and research are once again making an indispensable contribution to overcoming these challenges. Joint European research and innovation are the guarantee for a sustainable European continent. Research and innovation are very important drivers of the development of a resilient, sovereign and sustainable Europe after the crisis. With a strong European research area, we can therefore make a decisive contribution to shaping Europe's future. But what does that mean, and what is it that we wish to achieve? By holding this event, the German states want to work together to deliver their contribution to the realignment of the European research area. The universities have a central role in the development of the ERA. They are a significant pillar of education, research, development and culture in Europe. All dimensions of the European science system are reflected in them. They are major players in the research sector, make an outstanding contribution to the training of young scientists, tend to be at the heart of innovative ecosystems, and act as host for dialogue with the civil society. In Germany, spending on education and research has increased by about 25% over the past 5 years. In 2018, Germany spent 105 billion euros on research and development. That is roughly 3.13% of GDP. In the same year, over 30 billion euros of public spending went to the universities, with 25.2 billion euros provided by the federal states. The universities, in particular, are well-established institutions with a long tradition, within which the topic of transnational networking has always been an important aspect and an integral part of their educational mandate. In this, they now receive valuable support from the European university networks. With today's conference, we are keen to jointly discuss with you the role of the universities in the development of the ERA. The dedication and commitment by EU members has been and will continue to be the key to a dynamic and forward-looking era. As one of the largest science and research landscapes in Europe, Germany assumes its special responsibility to develop this European research area into a stable bedrock for a Europe that is more solidary and more resilient to future crises. We very much welcome the fact that the planned communication from the Commission on the European research area has initiated a long-needed discussion on the foundations, tasks and prospects of European research and innovation policy. From our point of view, the renewal of this area must be linked to the fact that European research policy is not limited to a funding program. The ERA should rather be understood as a conceptual framework for the comprehensive and strategic strengthening of development opportunities for science and research in Europe. Let us take a look at the ideas and proposals in detail. The aim should be to achieve a coherent strategic implementation for the European research area, similar to the European single market. With this in mind, we are proposing to better dovetail the European research area with existing education strategies, such as the European education area and the European higher education area. Moreover, it is vitally important that the European research area objectives fit-for-purpose national research structures, best possible interstate cooperation and competition, open employment market for researchers, gender and other equalities, best possible exchange of access to and transfer of research findings and international cooperation are clearly reflected in the Research and Innovation Framework Program. Based on the shared values of good scientific practice, any effort to upgrade the European research area must take into account the global competition amongst the various research and economic areas. The challenge is therefore to align the European research area with the strategic research and technology priorities pursued by the EU and to design it openly at the same time. In order to meet the global challenges effectively, joint research efforts are also required, which cannot be achieved in Europe alone. When it comes to the research sector, member states and regions are the key players that not only impose the regulatory framework, but also secure a large part of the funding for universities and research facilities. At the same time, the framework conditions of the research landscapes in the member states differ greatly. It goes without saying that these starting conditions must be taken into account when planning measures for the future design of the European research area. More than in the past, we must consider in particular the diversity of players and stakeholders in Europe's science and research landscape. These include researchers, research institutions, universities, business enterprises, science administrations and media, as well as the various tiers of government in the member states along with the European Commission and its directorates general. Ladies and gentlemen, before coming to a close, let me stress that the states of the Federal Republic of Germany are prepared and willing to contribute their expertise to the realization of the European research area. Now let's all have some stimulating discussions, and I pass over the floor to Monsieur Paquet.
Vielen Dank, Frau Ministerin, Herr Staatssekretär, lieber Jean-Pierre, lieber Panelist. Es freut mich sehr, heute die Gelegenheit zu haben, die Stellungnahmen der deutschen Bundesländer über European Research Area, der europäische Forschungsraum und Universitäten zu debattieren. Und ich freue mich auch sehr, dass ich diese Einladung annehmen konnte, auch on behalf of Commissioner Maria Gabriel. Dear Minister, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we do indeed celebrate this year the 20 years of the European Research Area. And I think we can proudly look back. We have worked with member states, associated countries, and all actors of Europe's science, research and innovation to radically transform over these 20 years the landscape for research in Europe. And this was indeed done not only at European, not only at national level, but across the research and innovation system in all member states, at all levels, and of course, particularly with universities. Just last week, Maria Gabriel, supported by DG Research and Innovation, held the second edition of the European Research and Innovation Days. The purpose was to connect during these 3 days all main players in Europe and beyond that shape our research and innovation landscape, that of course help us prepare properly the next framework program. And I must say, I'm very proud to say that we had more than 35,000 actors, institutions and citizens which connected to these research and innovation days and helped us across more than 150 sessions to really cover the ground. The results were, I think, quite, well, my team suggests impressive. I want to say, yes, they were impressive, but I also want to say that what is important is that they were really a milestone on a number of new developments where, Minister, as you said, this is not just about funding under European Framework Program, which of course is key. It makes a difference in many cases. Jean-Pierre will certainly tell you how the European Research Council has profoundly changed European science. It does structure the investments which are made across Europe, but then it is only 8 or 9% of European public funding. So it is much more than just about European programs. It's about research policies, and it's about research policies connecting to the broader public policy setup. And this is very much what was also the outcome of the discussions of our mission chairs, a report, the famous Horizon Europe missions on cancer, clean cities, clean oceans, clean soils and climate adaptation. They were presented, and we will now have the opportunity to work with German lenders, with member states, with actors and universities to make these missions a reality. The Horizon Europe missions are really about demonstrating that research and innovation outcomes provides knowledge and solutions which can then drive better public policies and ultimately deliver European public goods into our societies across the diversity of the European Union. During these research and innovation days, we also engaged, and I'm very grateful to the presidency for that, with the trio presidency, Germany, Portugal, and Slovenia. And we started working on devising what the main highlights should be for the European research area. And I think one of the main outcomes of these discussions is that, as you said, Minister, the European research area needs to become more visible, maybe more tangible and more concrete for research actors, also for citizens. And indeed, the single market is, I think, a very good analogy. At the heart of this effort, I think no need to say that there are major expectations on our side from universities. I think conversely, universities have major expectation also from the policy framework at national and EU level. But I think the European research area will get to that next level when actors of our European research space really take ownership for changing the way research is delivered collectively in Europe. So on Wednesday, in now a couple of days, the Commission will present its vision for this new European research area. I mean, importantly, this comes together with also presenting for Maria Gabriel her vision, not just on the European research area, but also on the European education area. There will also be a policy paper on digital skills. What you will see in the document is the colleges and the Commissioner's view on how to define the type of future we want for Europe. It will set out that we want the European research area to become an anchor of European excellence, excellent science, excellent research, excellent innovation, and supporting all member states across all research and innovation systems to achieve and benefit from that excellence. That is at the heart of our vision on the European research area. We also want that the European research area, and there's a lot of buy-in I see of member states and beyond, we also want the European research area to help provide direction for our twin transitions, climate and digital, and allow Europe's recovery to be supported by this knowledge and these solutions to achieve these two transitions and become more resilient. Of course, we will need and want to boost investment and competitiveness, and researchers and people will be at the heart of the European research area, developing what we call the circulation of the best minds in Europe, but also helping new skills and knowledge to become available. I think one very specific but absolutely key element of the European research area, I mean, for our president, Ursula von der Leyen, for Margrethe Vestager, but of course for Maria Gabriel and for myself, is gender equality. We will also try to bring the European research area to the next level in matters relating to gender equality and access to excellence. And last, I think what the European research area, not in isolation, but complementing a number of other policy initiatives ongoing right now, will do, is to build trust in Europe and promote common European values and academic freedom. So as you can see, it's a very ambitious, very rich agenda. And I must say, I'm very much looking forward after Wednesday to work with not just the trio presidency, but all member states and all actors of the European research area, German lenders, universities, research organizations, civil society, industry, to make this vision a concrete, tangible, and impactful reality. Well, universities are very much at the center of that effort. And the ambition on ERA is also our ambition on universities. And in fact, universities have a very particular role in this new ambition on generating a vision for Europe's knowledge area, which is that they, of course, cut across the education area, the higher education area, and the European research area. And universities have and will demonstrate that the synergies across these two policy areas are going to make a deep difference for Europeans. Universities are inclusive, they are excellent in Europe, and they do teaching and research for the future. So universities will be at the center of the close synergies between the two policy projects and the programs through their four key missions: education, research, innovation, and service to society. We have, and I don't think I need to go into too many details in this opening statement, we have had a long tradition of engagement of universities in European policies and programs. And I must say I'm very proud that EU programs starting with Horizon 2020 today Horizon Europe will certainly upgrade it even further, have been able to support not only individual universities in these 4 missions, but we also have been able, and that is a work done not in my part of the Commission, but I'm very proud to be associated to it now, we have been able also to help universities come together even more impactfully around university alliances, the European universities under the Erasmus program. And here, these alliances are test beds for deeper cooperation, free circulation of students, researchers, staff, and knowledge. And these university alliances, not necessarily exclusively, but they are particularly important to bridge the education, research, and innovation divide. Under Horizon Europe, which will start at the beginning of next year, and here again, there is good progress to be noted in the Council under the German presidency. There will be a competitiveness council tomorrow, where the expectation is that member states will agree on their position on the remaining open issues for the negotiation. And that will be followed then shortly by trilogue meetings with Parliament and Commission. And I think the perspective is therefore very clearly there that there will be an agreement on Horizon Europe in good time. MFF availability, of course, being necessary, that there will be an agreement for the program to start at the beginning of next year without any delays. We will, of course, provide a program with improvements and major simplifications, and I very much hope that universities will be able to best use from it, make use from it, including, of course, our researchers. I would also like to say that, again, on behalf of Maria Gabriel and my colleague and friend Themis Christophilou, I also would like to note the amazing use which our universities are making of Marie Skłodowska-Curie as a program. There will be a conference under German presidency, and this conference will indeed be a chance to continue the discussions which we have had on university research cooperation during the Research and Innovation Days. We are building together, and universities are very much building the future of Europe. To have young people fit for the challenges of the future, they need to gain new knowledge and insights. And universities in Europe will always remain the drivers of knowledge, attuned to the most pressing concerns of contemporary societies. And this is where, both in our programs and in new agendas, the Sustainable Development Goals, I think, should be the platform for our common work. And finally, and maybe most importantly, universities are one of the most important guardians of freedom of expression and, more precisely, of academic freedom. We should cherish, nurture, support, and defend it. There has always been a nexus of academic freedom of thought, research, and inquiry. And in a time of strong pressures on communal values and on openness to others, universities will, I'm sure, preserve their historic duty to method, freedom, and the pursuit of truth. These are debates and discussions which were not always part of the European research area, but which you will see very clearly in the Commission's vision. And I very much hope that we will be able, with all actors, to work to nurture these values together. So again, Minister, dear panelists, dear North Rhine-Westphalia, I'm delighted to be here, and I'm very much looking forward to be part of the panel discussion now. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Monsieur Paquet. And also a warm welcome from my side. My name is Thomas Estermann from the European University Association. I have the great pleasure today to moderate this excellent panel. As you've already heard, we are spread across Europe. So I think this is already a good sign to show the digital transition is possible. So we are based here in Brussels, in Berlin and Schwerin and Paris. And before I introduce our panelists, I would like to give a couple of indications how we plan to discuss within this next 1.5 hours that we have. As the background of the discussion will base the position that Minister Pfeiffer-Poensgen introduced in her welcome speech. So we will discuss the role of universities as key elements in the European research area. We will obviously talk about, and this has also been already mentioned, about values, funding, mobility, excellence, innovation, the role of citizens, and what it needs for the European research area to become a success. You're all now used to these digital platforms, so I also would like to encourage everyone to use the chat function to pose questions. We will monitor this and we'll feed this into this discussion. So with this, I would like to start introducing our panelists and first go to Berlin. We have in Berlin Professor Brigitte Wolff, Vice President of the HRK, the German University's Rectors Conference, and President of the University of Frankfurt. She's an economist and also served as Minister of Education and Minister of Research in Saxony-Anhalt. So she knows both sides. Very welcome to this panel. We have equally in Berlin, sitting next to her, Professor Wolf-Dieter Lukas, Permanent Secretary of the German Ministry of Education and Research. He has this position since 2019 and has been in the same ministry a long-standing career. And he is also a physician from his academic background and also taught at universities, so equally knowing both sides, both actors. Very welcome, Professor Lukas. We have in Schwerin coming in for the Minister of State of Mecklenburg-Western Pomerania, who could unfortunately not join us, but we have Susanne Bowen, who is the State Secretary at the same ministry, also has a long career within the sector that's relevant for the European research area. She has been Chancellor of a university in Germany, and from her academic background, she has studied law. Welcome to you as well. And we have in Paris, we have Professor Jean-Pierre Bourguignon, President of the European Research Council, very well known as well to the community. He was already on his way out, but he has come back for this period, for this interim period. And Professor Bourguignon is also a distinguished mathematician who has been working, I would say, across the European research area and beyond. Very welcome to Paris. And I have with me here in Brussels, Jean-Pierre Paquet, Director General of the Directorate Research and Innovation, who already gave the keynote speech, the introduction. He has the role since 2018, also very well known to the research community. He has a long career in the European Commission in different DGs. And he has a master from the European administration in Bruges and the German studies in Strasbourg. So for you, if you wondered of his perfect German, this is also where you know that. Very welcome, Mr. Paquet. So I would like to start this first round of reflections, going straight into the question of the role of universities in the European research area. With almost 800,000 researchers that are employed at universities, it's probably only natural to think that they're the key actors, and we've already heard it in our two introductions, that this is the key and this is the ambition. So there also, as it has been said, the link to the European education and European higher education area. There are also the link to citizens and society. So what I would like to hear in this first round is what are universities, what is the specific key role in this European research area? And I would like to pose the first question to Berlin and start with Professor Wolff, representing to universities. What you think is the future of universities in this next renewed European research area?
Well, thank you so much. Hello to everyone. Can you hear me? Oh, very good. First of all, thanks a lot to North Rhine-Westphalia, to the Minister, and to everyone else for appreciating or re-appreciating the role of the universities the way you do it in your paper. Of course, the University Rectors Conference loves the German Länder paper, because we always feel kind of stuck in the middle between the extra university research organizations, research and technology organizations that have a publicly funded budget of approximately or slightly more than 11 billion per annum. And on the other side, the polytechs, or as we call them today, the universities of applied sciences, who used to dedicate all their efforts to teaching, but now also venture into more research areas. So the traditional universities see themselves kind of squeezed in between, two seemingly competing groups of very strong organizations with blurring missions. So indeed, especially in the German university area, we asked ourselves what happened that our special mission kind of got lost. The universities, including, of course, some of the universities of applied sciences, merge three very different missions, which we believe are in fact crucial to the future development of Europe. And that's rocket science research that's really competitive on the world scale, plus they are also masters of dispersion of knowledge, because they, as opposed to the extra university research and technology organizations, have approximately 3 million students just in Germany, and they are wonderful ambassadors for science. Plus, they're also wonderful international ambassadors. Mr. Paquet mentioned Erasmus. That's one of the most wonderful inventions that has ever come out of Brussels. Plus, universities also tend to be cultural hubs in their regions. So if we manage to use the capacities of universities adequately, they can actually serve more than one mission. Plus, of course, they can be incubators for economic growth. If we also master to infuse maybe a little more spirit of entrepreneurship into some of them. And I see that there's a lot of potential that has been underused during the last years. And if that can be corrected, I guess the European research area provides wonderful opportunities for development.
Very much, Professor Wolff, for this first reflection. I would like to ask next Susanne Bowen from representing the German Länder, as this is also the event where we discussed the position that you have put forward from the German Länder in relation to the European research area. And there you focus, you say it's important to focus more on universities. So I guess that you must have had a reason why you put this in the focus, to particularly want to see more focus in the renewed European research area. Could you explain a little bit what you see as the specific role of universities in the new era?
Sure, thank you very much. As it was mentioned before, universities take place in regions near to citizens, and they interact with the region and the citizens and present values that are very important, and moreover, they reflect the values that are very important in the European Union. As Mrs. Brigitte Wolff said before, they can be a hub for culture experiences. They represent not even research, but also systems developed in universities as applied sciences. I think the Länder want to say and underline that the universities have fundamental values, and those fundamental values are very important for the next area of the era. At the moment, we see it in East Europe that those values are not very deeply rooted, and so it is more important that we focus more on those values, like academic of freedom of academic, freedom of speech, and also those values are important to focus on.
Thank you very much for this first reflection. Can I come back to Berlin with State Secretary Lukas? How do you see the role of universities in ERA from the perspective of the federal state? Do you see something we've already heard from our previous speakers and interventions? Anything in addition, or do you have also different perspective?
First of all, I would like to say that I totally agree to my Länder colleague, but I would like to have another perspective. I would say when we started Europe, we started this as a European coal and steel community. And I see what is the future of Europe. I would say the future of Europe is not what we call in Germany a Montanunion, so a community of steel and coal, but what we need is a European Union, a research union. And that's what, when I talk about the European research area, first I would say, what is the goal of Europe, where we want to live in? And I want to live in a Europe which is now where the politicians do politics on not on a value based only, but on a science base. They do science-based policy. So I would say, first of all, the universities play a very important role, not only when we talk about research, when we talk about teaching, but they play a very important role for our whole society. And I would say, when you look at the Charter, European Charter of for the fundamental rights, I think we find one sentence: the art and scientific research shall be free of constraint. I think we made, in our European presidency, I think it's a question, academic freedom as one main point of our agenda of the European presidency. We will hold up a conference in Bonn. We just want to come to a declaration to the freedom of science and, of course, freedom of teaching. And so what we talked about the key elements. So universities are a key element of. I would say that we talked about the rule. I would say we have to talk about the spirit and the purpose. And we have learned what is the purpose. Of course, this is research. Of course, this is education. Of course, this is innovation. Of course, maybe not, of course, services for the society. I would say doing science is a service for society. To give, and so Why is this so important? I would like to go back. I think there was, a discussion, not a discussion, a finding, a so-called finding of cold fusion. I don't want to explain what it is, but it's fusion without having a lot of, you have got to put a lot of energy in, but you get a lot of energy out. So you do this by room temperature. And all the politicians say that is great, cold fusion, wonderful. We don't have to invest in nuclear power, whatever. We get it for free. It was a free lunch. And we all know there's no free lunch. And for me, it was very important in which countries these, wrong findings were found again. So where say, well, yes, there's an effect. And it was very clear. It was in the communist countries. And this was always, they say, minister, of course we found it in so very fine. And it was in some other countries where the competition about money was in a way that they saw when we don't find this, when we don't get money anyway. And I was so proud that in Germany, no scientist has said, Minister Riesenhuber, yes, we found this effect and we will investigate on it. Again, they said, no, this is really silly science. And I say, you see, the politicians, sometimes they need advice from science. And I want to have advice from people who are free in thinking and not who are always saying, do I still get funding if I give this kind of advice? And therefore, the freedom of university is also a way that we give the funding free of intervene in what they are doing and how they are doing. They have to abide their own rules, the rules of science, which are international rules. And so what we learned, I think in 2006, you know that Germany has a lot of non-university research institutes, and we spend a lot of money there, and we are shareholders of these non-university research institutes. And in 2006, we learned we have too much concentrated on them because we are shareholders. And since 2006, we have really enlarged our investment in research in universities. We did a lot also for University of Applied Science. When I started in 2006, we spent a little program 8 million euro. Then it was 10, then it was 20, then it was 30, then it was 40. I think now it's 50. So I think there was a strong, understanding also in Germany that the universities are the key element in science. So we need them. And now if we take the values, if we take the function of how of funding, that means we give money, but we don't. But the university are free in deciding what they are searching about and how they search and what they teach. And if you take this and then you put together universities, 41 or more universities in Europe, then you're working not only on the European research area, then I think you're working on a research union in Europe. And I always say Europe, but I mean first the European Union. Why? Because we have there, I was agreed on values. And I think we should be open in Europe to every country which follows these rules and which follows our ideas and values. So for me, I think the research area is first a research area of the European Union. Then, of course, hopefully, a European one, whole Europe, and maybe open for a lot of partners in the world, because there are other regions in this world which do science, good science, but they have only to focus on what the government, they can only search on what the government agrees on. And this is not what I think should be the universities in Europe, and they are not like this. And so I'm proud of this. Thank you.
Very much, Professor Lukas, for these additional aspects. So strong alignment of views, but also spirit and purpose as an important aspect. And we will pick up on the point of values in a minute. I would like to give the opportunity also to Professor Bourguignon in Paris. You're the funding with projects from the European Research Council to a very large degree research that's mostly undertaking at universities. So what is your take on the role of universities in the European research area?
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to say a few things in this very important meeting, because the European research area celebrating 20 years is actually definitely a step forward in the direction of what State Secretary said about really a Europe Union for Research. And indeed, for the European Research Council, for the ERC, the universities are typical host institutions. And when we sign contract, although we are absolutely faithful to leaving total initiative for submitting projects to individuals, to researchers, definitely when we sign the contract, we sign it with a host institution. And many of them are indeed universities. It varies a little bit from one country to the next, but they are really playing a very critical role. And the reason why they are playing such a key role is that because they are the main employers of researchers. And of course, this makes them absolutely inevitable and fundamental actors of this European research area. The other point I want to make, which relates to the values, but maybe in a, of course, for me, academic freedom is absolutely cannot be discussed. It's something which has to be completely, fully, and permanently respected. But there is one dimension on which we really rely a lot on the host institution at the ERC, which has to do with the implementation of ethical rules. And because in a sense, I think it is just a fact that the ERC has not the capacity of, dealing with ethics directly, but we do, when we sign our contracts with the host institutions, rely on these institutions having the proper structure to deal with behaviors which are really not correct from the ethical point of view. And therefore, we really insist that they also should be very strong in the way they deal with ethics and the way they really look into cases which happen, not too often, but they do happen, of misconduct. Why is this so important? Well, it is so important, especially at this time, where really we need to have the trust of the population. And in the sense to destroy a trust, you need just a few cases that can be exploited, and where you are not, we collectively as a community are not strict enough in doing the proper inquiries and the proper follow-up. And therefore, for us, relying on the universities is extremely important. My second point is a slightly different one, which actually goes back to the creation of the European research area, which was really initially meant that the scientists should feel that within Europe, there is really a natural space in which they can move easily. And of course, that was really the very basic step forward. Of course, I'm now not so young scientist. I remember that I used to meet my European colleagues in the States. Now, of course, I'm really working in Europe, and that's the place where I meet the people. And of course, this has changed. So Europe as a continent, and of course, mainly the European Union, but also more broadly, some associated countries which are completely embedded in the European system, really are natural places for people to move around, to exchange, to co-organize, to do joint publications and so on. And of course, this doesn't mean that Europe should become isolated, not at all. But the good way of not being isolated is to be at the front. And to be at the front, Europe has to be strong enough. And this is where we touch on an issue which at the moment is very, very hot, which is what will be the means put at the disposal of the European of Horizon Europe, which is the next framework program for research and innovation. And as you know, many institutions, universities first, but also at the level of European Research Council, are very concerned that definitely what has come out of the summit in July is really the biggest cut was definitely for Horizon Europe. And for us, it was a big surprise, actually something we could not understand. And to have a thriving European research area where young people feel comfortable, they see that they have a future. It's fundamental that they see that really the research has been taken as one of the key means to make Europe truly competitive for the future, truly able to deal with the challenges. And for this to happen, again, universities are the key, because the universities are the main employer of researchers. So in order for the universities to have the means and to get their research properly supported, it's fundamental that at national level, sometimes also at regional level, but also at European level, there is enough support available.
Thank you very much, Professor Bourguignon. You've already touched now also again on the values and also on the means, two topics that we will talk about in a minute. I would like to give on this sort of last round in the first topic on the role of universities also to Mr. Paquet. The question you've heard, what the panelists said, and you've already introduced also the importance of universities in your keynote. You called them they're the anchor. So so many things have already been said. Is there anything that you would like to add? What you've heard from the speakers, and maybe also to the high expectations that the sector has. Will they be happy when they read on Wednesday the new communication, your vision?
Well, they will tell us. Huh? I saw already a few early reactions from university associations on Twitter, which were very positive. So let's see if that is confirmed then on Wednesday. Now, I think maybe one dimension which I would like to add is that the European research area is for universities to shape. Huh? And we are not going to tell universities what their European research area is. What we will do is to be extremely clear that we see that they have a central role to play. We will, of course, certainly want to support European universities in Europe and European universities to become active in that setup, and there will be resources available. As you know, we are now finalizing funding to complement the Erasmus funding on the transformation agenda of European universities. So we will, of course, do our part of the work. But as is the case for the rest of the European research area, I think what we are now really seeing, and I much welcome it and promoting, is that actors pick up the European research area. And you then design it, and we will be there to do it with you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think this is also a clear call to our audience, who is very strongly from the university sector, to really take this up and shape it. So I think that is a very important message towards the actors. I would like to pick up on what I think almost everyone has said, the importance of values in this European research area. And I think this is something that we've seen also in a broader discussion, maybe more than so than if we had discussed this 5 or 10 years ago, the importance of values. And of course, when we talk about values, we can talk about it from the researcher's perspective, research ethics and integrity, what also Professor Bourguignon mentioned, but of course also academic freedom, and then also for the institutions, institutional autonomy. I would like to add to this that are key key aspects of the European research area. So I think we've heard here, this is a very clear message from everyone. My question to you would be now, how can this be ensured also through the European research area or other aspects? I think we have clear points of views here, but the question is what happens if one actor within the European research area, if those values are violated? If I maybe just start with you, Monsieur Paquet, how can that be implemented?
Not so easy, huh? As we all know, we don't have I mean, we are a union of law, and we need the legal instruments also to often enforce a number of principles. So the Charter of Fundamental Rights is, of course, there's a reference point, but it's not always sufficiently specific on the issue of freedom of expression and academic freedom to be a legal base for implementation in case one sees infringements to the principle of academic freedom. And we've seen that indeed in a few cases over the last couple of years. So we are launching the discussion now with the communication on Wednesday to see what actors see as the relevant possible legal instruments. This is not necessarily a univocal discussion. I think there will probably be different remedies which will be identified in the discussion. I think we also will have to see what the appetite is in member states. In case the recommendation is for European legislation, we don't recommend it as such, but we don't rule it out either in the document, which I expect to be adopted on Wednesday. So the debate is launched. I'd be really interested to hear already today whether there are concrete recommendations from the other panelists on how to best do that.
Thank you very much. I would like to pass on these questions directly to our panelists in Berlin. Professor Lukas, you have mentioned that you're planning also a conference in Bonn with declarations, and could you say something about your perspectives?
Yes, but I would like to have another perspective. Again, I would say, first of all, it's very important that the scientists speak up. I would say when we talk about networks of universities, I think it has to be up to the universities, to the scientists. Who are the partners? I think, you see, think there is a member state who is taking influence on science in a way which is not in agreement with our European rights. Think about it. I think the answer cannot be that I think our scientists are not cooperation with the scientists in this country. But they should be very clear. We decide who are our partners and not the governments of the member states. So of course we will end up sometimes with a situation that the partner is not allowed or is not getting the support. Okay, then we have a case. But we should cooperate, the scientists should decide, and they should speak up and say, that's not right. We want to cooperate. We are partners. I think a scientist is stronger when he has a big community. When he has in the community are the scientists in the world. And if you're a good scientist, you are in this community, and I think you are in the European community. I would say it's very important that we have this community of scientists who speak up and say he belongs to us and he's a good scientist. And he should also get support in your country. I would say this is freedom of speech and this is freedom of science. We have to put this both together. Second, I would say we should also speak up here. We would say, I think my minister very clear. We want still cooperate with with a country which is not obeying the rules, maybe for a moment, maybe in a special case, maybe in general, but we should speak also up and make clear that this is not the future for the cooperation. Maybe that's the status, but the goal is something different. And so I think, therefore, I wanted to make very clear that this is for us very important, that when we are a part of the European Union, that the rights of our the fundamental rights of our European Union are followed. But the answer can only be support by the scientists by themselves. And then they get also support, I think, by the member states and of course by the European Commission, because it's up to the European Commission to look at that all member states are following, I think, the fundamental rights. It's up to them to control this, to report. And of course, at the end, they cannot do it by themselves. They need the member states again. But I think it's up also to the Commission to speak up and to make the points very clear. But most of the member states are working in a different way. So I would say, so it's very good to have the networks of universities because they would help. And therefore, I would say we should let all become into the university network so that the European universities get stronger, the scientists get stronger. And I would say very important is, we talked to the members of the European Parliament, and we talked about cohesion in Europe. And for all members of Parliament we speak with, was very clear that it's very important that the students in Europe, that they have the possibility to study abroad in Europe, and also to be part of this research and, of course, education area, what we are building up. So I think the younger people are our future, and they will change also then something in their countries and bring the future in all the countries in Europe and everywhere else. You see, I think I was, when after the Brexit, they looked for lawyers. They looked for lawyers, of course, British lawyers who have studied European law. And I talked to some of them and they said, I have not studied European law to do the Brexit. So look for other people, but I'm not willing to work for the government to work for the Brexit. You see, this is a younger generation which says we are part of Europe, we want to stay in Europe, and we want to follow these values. I would say I'm very proud of, now we are talking about the universities and about the scientists there, but more important is that these are institutions where there are teachers, where there are students, and this is, I think, where I think they get the spirit of science. And I would say this is, I think, then also a good experience for the future.
Thank
Well,
you.
may I say
Thank
something?
you very much. Yes,
Against,
please.
yeah. Well, if I may say something, I think we are kind of drifting towards a rather slippery slope here, because the mission of science is, first of all, science. And I don't think we're going to be a very good strawman, you know, to propose or pursue political missions that the politicians themselves should be pursuing, maybe even more successfully. We know that freedom is a prerequisite of successful academia, but if you consider science as pursuing political battles with a different set of means, you might end up not having really excellent science. Thus, my pledge would be not to over-challenge us with too much of a political mission as opposed to a scientific mission.
Can I just answer very short, please? Yes, but I have the other perspective. I think freedom of science is necessary, but we need the best science for our society. So I would say, I think the freedom in a society and the freedom of science belong to each other. We cannot without good science, you cannot do good politics, and you cannot do good science in a surrounding where you don't have freedom to do this. So I would say this fits together. And I'm not talking about what is the duty, of the civil servants, of the politicians. I'm talking about how these both kinds of freedom have to fit together and need each other. That's what I was talking about.
Well, that's interesting, but look at the scientific success that Chinese colleagues have without living in a totally free society, or the historical successes of Russian
humanities.
Now we are getting to the point. You know, there's a discussion.
They do research in Germany, and afterwards they go back to China, get arrested because they did research here in Germany.
But then we should be a little more specific about what science, what fields of science, what areas, you know, of academic life we are talking about. And a lot of things, and that's, by the way, one of the important questions that I think is important in Brussels too. What do they mean by talking about science? There's the strong drifts towards technology, technological driven innovation. And I think that's everyone's darling, right? And governments tend to give engineers as much freedom as they need to reach the moon, the Mars, or whatever. However, humanities is really a different kind of story. A lot of politicians don't seem to consider freedom in the humanities and also funding of humanities in a broader sense as important as technological or science or engineering projects.
Can a university exist without humanities?
Depends on how you define university. If you define it in terms of universitas.
Not in a university, but with, I think, in the connection with humanities. Can you do good science without humanities?
Well, my personal take would be
connection to the society.
In the long run, no, but in the short run, there are counterexamples, and I think it's worth thinking about them.
Can I take these questions and pick them up, because they're also one important element of ERA, and also within the position of the German Länder, the question on which kind of science we're talking about, fundamental, curiosity-driven, science more technological-driven, the inclusion of social sciences, as you already referred to, and also the inclusion of civil society. So those are also key questions, I think, in the European research area, obviously related to funding. So can I have the views of the other panelists on that point, also listening a little bit to the dialogue in Berlin? And as I referred to the position of the German Länder, could I ask Ms. Bowen in Schwerin, what is your take on that question? Is there a tension between those things?
Between the things of humanities and engineering, you mean? I think there might be a tension between those sciences. And I would like to come back to a point Mr. Lukas mentioned before. Beside the legal framework and the university networks, I think it is very important that we stress out the point of community involvement, and also he mentioned the importance of the student exchange programs. I think it's very important that we have strong roots of scientific and at the end of universities in the community. And I ask myself how we can strengthen those questions or those those points in the next program. So I think we have to build some frameworks that can be strong roots for those questions, because then we are back to the values of the European Union and also to the program itself. I would underline those questions. How can we involve the community more, the regional community, the national community, in the whole ERA program the next decade?
Okay, thank you very much. Also, this last point, something we will pick up in a moment. But on the question, if we still stay with the question, what kind of type of research will be important in the European research area? If I can ask Professor Bourguignon in Paris, I know that you're very active now also of communicating the role of basic research in the whole research innovation chain. So what is your perspective, your view on what we can see, the tensions between the different types of research that is undertaken?
Thank you. Well, I will for sure come to your question because it's a very central one, in particular in the coming weeks or months. But I want to pick up on two things before I come to this briefly. The first one is one of the extreme cases in which the ERC was confronted with really freedom attacks on freedom, where in the case where ERC grantees were fired from their universities on political grounds. This happened. And you see, one of the instruments that the ERC has is the portability of grants, which is, as I mentioned, the ERC signs with a host institution, but the person who won the grant has the right to go where or she wants to go because of the portability. And actually, in this case, it was even worse because the person who, of course, wanted to use portability because he was actually denied to be able to work in the university. Actually, it went further because there was even an accusation that he would not be allowed to work in his own country at all. And of course, strictly on political reasons. So this case exists, and I think we, as a European institution, we have to really be completely behind these people who are facing this. The other point, I wanted to make a small comment to what State Secretary Lukas said concerning China. It's just as a scientist, my first visit to China was 1981. So you can imagine in a quite different country. And I've been visiting China many, many times. And one thing I see in terms of quality, the improvement of quality in my own discipline, a certain part of mathematics, I'm forced to recognize that presently, probably something like 2/3 of the very best people are Chinese. And they have, of course, some of them have been trained in Western countries, but the capacity, which has gone with a huge investment, but also attracting wonderful students, high dedication, and really, really a very, very strong community which develops its activity. So I think we have to be careful not to believe that China has developed itself purely by taking things away from Western countries. I think the capacity of this country, because of mobilization, because of talent, because of course, there are plenty of problems, but still the capacity to develop very high level science is real. And we should not do as if it was depending on us. It's not depending on us anymore at all. And so therefore we have to keep this in mind. It does mean we have to be fully satisfied with what is happening. Now to your question, very specifically, of course, as you can imagine, one thing which worries me over the recent development, not only at European level, but also at national level, is very often the huge priority given for top-down research versus bottom-up research. And in a sense, I understand why this is happening, because for really many people, many policy makers and politicians, people who have to make decisions, there are urgencies and people want the urgencies to be addressed. And therefore you get the feeling that I should really concentrate my means very soon. Unfortunately, this is not exactly the way things go. Of course you have to do that. I'm not saying you should not do it, but if you do it too much, then for the next challenge which comes, then you are not ready. And the example, very concrete example I can give, you see in the case of ERC, which is totally bottom-up, we leave totally the researchers propose the project they feel is the most ambitious, the most challenging. When the pandemic arrived, we checked which of the projects we had could be relevant. And there were 183 projects which proved relevant without any reference to pandemic. It was decided much before it and representing a quite substantial amount of money, more than 340 million. And for some of them, it was just clearly in the topic of the pandemic. Some others, it meant that with a slight change of the project, you became completely relevant. And during the research innovation days, there was one session organized by the ERC on the relevance to COVID-19, I'm sorry. And then I must say the project presented were really amazing in terms of anticipation, although people were not thinking of the pandemic. It's just that the science proved to be relevant. You see, to find solutions, you have to understand. And to understand is a question which is really a general question. Of course, under pressure, you can really probably do more things, get more people to work together and so on. But I'm really worried of the tendency, not only at European level, but also at national level, to privilege so much top-down research over bottom-up research. This is also part of the freedom of researchers, because you limit their freedom, and in a sense that you encourage them, that you facilitate for them the possibility to adapt is fundamental. And that's what the ERC has been doing. We have increased the flexibility, which actually resulted in more or less a doubling of the amendments to projects that have been signed, because we felt that but all this was done at the initiative of researchers. They were not telling them anything, just said, if you come up with a good proposal to adapt, we will look into it and we'll give you an answer. So I think this dimension of freedom, which is the freedom to look really into the future, into what you consider the true challenge and really the most challenging situation, is something critical. And actually in the recent move for the Horizon Europe, definitely there has been an erosion of Pillar 1, which was the place where really the bottom-up research is concentrated. And I don't think it's good news, because on top of that, this will happen at a moment where also at national level, a number of bottom-up programs will be cut. So I think we have to be very careful. In order to make really Europe resilient, you need enough of this totally free research. And of course, it has to be, you have to exploit the results, you have to organize yourself properly with what is done, you have to facilitate people to network and so on. But this space for completely free research is very critical. So I'm really not an advocate for myself, in a sense, being in charge of ERC, because really I believe if you analyze the process by which research is relevant for society, then you see this, and in a sense, the pandemic has been a fantastic test for this.
Very much, Professor Bourguignon, and I think this also leads us now to one question that has also been already addressed in the welcome speeches, is the sufficient means. And as you said, we are ahead of us in a challenging times, and of course the funding for the European research area needs to be done with various funding sources at European level, national level, regional level, and of course also the private sector has to contribute to that to really make it a success. But we are ahead of us with a recession, with challenging times. I just read also on the way here that several member states announced the decline in GDP development. So that means also at national level that will be challenging to fund universities and research in the next decade. And we've also heard and already discussed it, the funding at European level and is challenging. We have the deal in July, which on the MFF, which has left particularly the research community with some disappointed. Of course, expectations are always higher, and we should not forget that within this deal it has a historic recovery package in addition, but very clearly for the European research area, the question now is also, and it has already been addressed now in this last statement from Professor Bourguignon, how to allocate the resources, and I would say particularly also in Horizon Europe, between the different pillars. And I would like to point this question to Mr. Paquet. We still don't know the final outcome, but I think we can expect that there have been difficult choices have to be made. So how are you approaching this in terms of allocation between the different pillars, between also the transversal pillar for ERA? You probably must have made plans already.
Well, I mean, we are waiting for the outcome of the discussions between member states. I mean, the German presidency, like I think any other presidency, is finding it extremely challenging to now translate the outcome of the European Council decision on the Horizon Europe program, to translate it into a proper distribution in the budget. We have, as Commission, been confronted to that when we made the proposal back in 2018. And I think I very much agree with Jean-Pierre Bourguignon that we absolutely need to ensure that we allow curiosity-driven research to drive the knowledge needed for applied research to then become a practical reality. So that is something where the Commission in 2018 has put very significant resources on the European Research Council. This was the biggest increase across any component. Not quite as big in Marie Curie, but also a significant increase. We were only a bit flat on infrastructure at the time. Now, the difficulty is that the overall budget is indeed smaller. And I think we saw in Council, and we have seen it in other discussions too, there is a very, very good case to make to increase any component in Horizon Europe. I can give you 10 different reasons to increase 10 different components of Horizon Europe. I'm sure I would convince you on each of them. But then I have not yet found any good reasoning to decrease any component of Horizon Europe. And for the same very good reasons, which is why the approach is to do it in a linear manner, which is not particularly satisfactory, I must say, but it's probably one way forward. So that's where the discussion is now happening. Let's see where we are in the next few days. There is, I think, a very strong mobilization in the European Parliament, which I think should be welcomed, to in the discussions between Parliament and Council on the multi-annual financial framework, to increase the overall size of the budget. I mean, how significant that increase can be is, for me, where I sit, difficult to judge. But from that increase, if it materializes, then Horizon Europe is one of the very visible priorities for the European Parliament. But here again, what this then will mean for Horizon Europe, we'll see in the next few weeks. So there is still a little bit of a perspective there. But I think the balance of the Commission proposal is a reasonable one, I would argue. Now, what is really important is not the balance in Horizon Europe. This is not where this is happening now. What is really important, and that's where the European Research Area process, the policy proposal from the Commission this week, the work done by presidencies in Council, the discussion on how we can collectively better work together is much more important in two respects. Firstly, to do collectively better with the resources which are available. I think there's a degree of dispersion and sometimes duplication, which is not always problematic, because I think creativity is certainly enhanced by diversity. Research areas can certainly benefit from being funded with slightly different angles in a multiple manner. But at the same time, I think there are also possibilities to do it much more effectively. So that's going to be one part of the European Research Area discussion. The other one is that it is absolutely essential that we ensure that at national level, the investment in research and innovation, as is the case in Germany, very clearly, this was mentioned by the minister, continues to be commensurate to the needs. And in 2008, we have seen in the financial crisis that research and innovation suffered in many parts of Europe. Not everywhere, but in many parts of Europe. And I think we need to argue together that this is not the case, as budgets will need to consolidate over the next years. In this context, the message of the European Research Area is member states, you need to individually and collectively continue to invest in research and innovation. Horizon Europe is then a means to support that better investment.
Thank you very much. I think also already some indications for what I probably would say the curious listeners as well, how you will deal at European level with the allocation within Horizon Europe. So I think that's already a very interesting message to the audience as well. And as you said rightly, a large effort needs to come also from member states. I would like to pose the question back to Berlin, Professor Lukas. As you already mentioned, I mean, you have as the holding the presidency, the role of the brokerage of a deal. What is your perspective now? Do you see the same development as Mr. Paquet?
Because we have the presidency, I can say that we totally agree with the European Commission, because this is our common way of managing, I think, the discussions about the budget. So I think to Mr. Bourguignon, just to mention, we were half a year before and the years before always in big favor of the European Research Council, and we will do this at the 1st of January again. Today, I think we are in the presidency and we have to be neutral. But I would like to, I would say, to add something. What are the programs are for? Of course, they're for to support excellent science. But I would say we could be very proud in Europe to have reached the 3.0 percentage goal. Great, wonderful. There are some countries doing even better in the north of Europe, but we reached a goal. And now we can say we are happy, or we can have a new goal, 3.5 of the GDP spent for research. I would say that we cannot be happy with this, because I think the cohesion of Europe, and I'm talking about the cohesion on a top level of the European Union, on our economic systems. And you see, we have already large differences in the European in the economic power between the member states, and I think we cannot leave it as it is. And for me, the answer is to invest in all countries as most as possible in research and innovation. So for me, I think the expenditures of the European level are, like my colleague from the European Commission already said, it's not enough, but it's really necessary, because it gives the basis also in all member states to develop best research, to get funding. We talked about the European Research Council. I would say they have one criteria, that's excellency, and that's right. And wherever the excellency is, but I think we have also to build up structures where we get also an increase in expenditures in research all over Europe, and not only by spending money by the European Union, but I think the European Union is the instrument to start with, and to see, and so that regions see that they get a economical development in their country. If there is an investment in research, there will be investment in innovation, and then I will say they get this. If this is an investment, because they get a lot of taxes back. So I would say we have to start up this development, and this is where the European money from the European Union is so important for. So I would say the cohesion has to be, I would like that every country in Europe reach the 3% goal spending of research of their GDP. This is necessary, because otherwise we will not stay together in Europe, because then we will also we have no cohesion then on the economic level, and we cannot leave it as it is, and only giving finance in countries which are not developed in the same way is the wrong thing. We have not to give them money to spend the money for whatever. We have to invest the money, and the best investment is in education, in research, in innovation. And therefore I would say, so these programs, European programs, are more important, I think, for Europe as a whole, as for maybe Germany as a member state.
I think that also poses the question on the better alignment of these different funding sources. And can I just relate this question to Professor Wolff? As a university, you receive funding from all different sources of European, national, regional. What is your expectation of the different providers of funding for the success of the European research area?
Well, I think it's important to see that they complement each other, that they don't replicate or compete with each other, but that the EU provides a different kind of, funding for different kinds of mission. And my university, Goethe University Frankfurt, has been striving to become more successful in raising money from the EU, not just because of these wonderful European ERC grants that, of course, all researchers love, but that's a second very interesting line of funding. It's been mentioned before, Horizon, that creates strong incentives to create partnerships also with big and small and medium-sized enterprises, which again help us on the one hand side to make it more likely that we end up, finding things that actually will end up having some use in society, not just in the economy, also in the non-profit sector, in the public administration, but also, teaming up with firms enables us to leverage our public investment. If we look at, where the funding in R&D comes from, it's approximately 2/3 from private corporations throughout most of the European countries, and only 1/3 from the government organizations, which is, of course, then split up between universities and other research organizations. So teaming up is, I believe, a very important strategy, and I find that also in the mainstream among Brussels politicians. However, there we often end up, having an interesting dilemma, which is the conflict of interest between creating knowledge as a public good, and the keyword here is open access, open science, and of course the corporate world's legitimate interest to create idiosyncratic property, intellectual property that they can exploit for their commercial interests. And I see that there's still some, challenge there to solve these dilemmata that I observe, in negotiating contracts, in using the results of research.
Much. I would also at this point now encourage our audience to use the chat and maybe also pose some questions. I've already got one which I will save rather for the last round. And I'm looking a little bit at the watch as well. We have 20 minutes, and before we go sort of through a last round where I would like to give everyone the opportunity for a last reflection. There's one element that has already come up, is already now in these last responses as well, cohesion, synergies. So that is also a question that has been debated in the past. How does this fit together in the European research area with excellence? We've heard it also at the beginning. Excellence is key for the European research area. Sometimes excellence and cohesion or the question of synergies has been considered as being mutually exclusive, but I think we are today at a different level of the discussion. So what I would like to hear from panelists is how do you see the question of synergies and excellence? How can you put them together also in the European research area in practice? Mr. Paquet, can I start with you?
Jean-Pierre, I'm happy that Jean-Pierre starts.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Yes, I would like to say something on this, just to maybe not all people have the figures in mind. In the case of cohesion, at the moment, if you look at the program finishing, which is in a sense parallel to Horizon 2020, the amount which goes to cohesion, which is affected to research and innovation, is 43 billion euro. So you should remember that the figure for Horizon 2020 is 75 billion. So it's a very significant number. And then, of course, this money goes to not only to, I would say, EU 15 countries, but mostly to EU 15 countries. And of course, as you know, it's a complicated process because this money is managed in a way where the European Commission puts some money, but then the region has to put some money. And then this introduces, of course, the necessity for the political level locally to get engaged. And then that's where I think the problem with excellence starts to appear, because in a sense, not always are the scientists who are the best scientists in the country which have the best political connections. And therefore, I think it's something which we need to improve, which is to make sure that this money is not just something which is money which arrives and then it is done, but really something which then nurtures the right training, brings in young people, and then really is the seed for a future development. So I think this is something we have to keep in mind. That is, the amount of money which goes to cohesion is very significant. I'm not critical about this at all, but we must make sure that the articulation with the scientific community is done in the right way. And this is difficult. I'm really convinced, because since you are asking locally people to contribute, which is the rule for that, then of course you have to deal with who is in charge locally. And then this can introduce a twist. That was my first point. My second point has to do also with the influence of some of the European programs on the rest, that is on national organizations. Actually, the ERC has inspired 15 countries to change their funding system in the country. The most spectacular one is the one in Poland, which created a funding agency for research called NCN, which really is absolutely copied from ERC. But there are many other examples. And then there are definitely countries which are really shown if you put the proper attention. Very good example is Slovenia. You go from being with no grant, basically, to be one of the most successful countries. So it shows that, of course, very often the lack of money is a reason for why the research is more difficult in some countries, but sometimes it's really a structural reform, or even giving proper attention to the young people, to giving hope for people to develop. And the same way for the ERC and the other part of the framework program, I must say that while I was president in my previous mandate, I spent quite a lot of time working jointly with the people from the EIC, preparing the EIC, European Innovation Council, because at no moment did we see EIC as really a threat to ERC. We saw it exactly to the opposite, as being a very interesting extension with a completely different rules, completely different objectives, but still we could see how we could feed this. And the same is true with a number of clusters or missions, where there are a very large number of the people who create or develop these missions or clusters who are actually ERC grantees. So actually, you see the way a program really is successful is, of course, by making it possible for people to do their research. But at the same time, these people become available for other activities. And sometimes they are really the local heroes, and sometimes they are really developing new communities. For example, for quantum information, all the key people in quantum information are actually all ERC grantees. And of course, it was not the purpose of ERC to develop quantum information. But of course, since we had extremely good people in quantum information, they get together and want to start something new. So I think we have always to keep in mind that if you really, the quality always pays. That's really my lesson. That is because it becomes the example to be followed, or the people who develop with this level of quality become the reference for further developments.
Sure. Mr. Paquet, would you like to reflect on that?
Yeah, I must say I'm really very pleased to see that the debate on excellence and cohesion is now in a completely different place than it was only 5 or 10 years ago, where it was opposed. Today, I think it is very clear. We saw it in the Council as we were negotiating Horizon Europe. This is not either or. And you had some ministers saying, well, I have a particularly good research and innovation system, but frankly, the research which is not taking place in your member state is a problem for me. And other member states which were still building them up were saying, we are building up our systems on the basis of excellence. So that is, I think, is for me a very, very strong, there's a strong consensus that we need to develop 27 national research and innovation systems on the basis of the principle of excellence to deliver impactful science, impactful research, impactful innovation. Now, how to do that is, of course, challenging. I think it starts by national investments and national reforms. We can be part of the reform process to help, and member states amongst one another are often sharing best practices. And then indeed, these 3% overall objective can probably also be then cut down or in steps which are more reachable to really encourage all member states to invest better and more in their own innovation system. Then there will, as Jean-Pierre has said, in the next period, regional funding will remain available on a very broad basis, contributing to these developments at national level. And then Horizon Europe will be implemented across the principle of excellence, in addition, and structuring then the European research area. So I think the trajectory is very positive. Let me add maybe one more specific dimension, because under synergies, which was your question, for me, synergies is also how do we better combine sources of support, national and European, but also within the European budget. And you will, I'm very optimistic, see as an outcome of the German presidency work, and then in the negotiations with the European Parliament, I think this time around, we will effectively be able to combine regional funding with Horizon Europe. The Seal of Excellence, which is one good example, is being brought to the next level, much easier. But we are now in a discussion in the European Council in July. This was not much commented on, but confirmed its agreement that it will be possible to transfer regional policy funds into centrally managed programs. And we have in the ongoing discussions found also very practical ways to make this applicable and possibly attractive. And if this is then done, because it will of course be available to be used or not, but for those countries which will want to use it, the perspective really is that rather than having a seal of excellence under the European Research Council or the European Innovation Council, if you provided funding into the program, these excellent projects under the budgetary availability could then be directly picked up by the ERC, directly picked up by the EIC, with the benefit of being managed by great teams on both sides, but of course, more importantly, with the benefit of having the full label ERC, our Nobel Prize factory, or ERC, our unicorn factory. So that's really the type of discussions which are now ongoing, which I'm optimistic will close positively and will allow much more fruitful and impactful synergies between programs. And there are many, many other examples.
I have to say this, I'm personally also very pleased that this is going in that direction. This is something that we also have been calling for as a way of obviously with making scarce resources a more efficient and effective use. So if this can be implemented in practice, that would certainly be a big leap. We have 10 minutes left before I have to close this roundtable discussion, and I think we could go on because we still have many topics that we could discuss under this today's conference. So I would like to give also everyone now the chance to maybe touch upon what, from your perspective, is one of the key success factors for the implementation of ERA. So please feel free to touch on aspects that you haven't put forward yet. Maybe you can also reflect on something on the governance of ERA, which we have not touched upon. So this is really pleased for you to have a sort of, and I need to ask you that you keep it short, reflection, key success factors of the implementation of ERA. And can I maybe have the first view in Berlin from Professor Lukas?
Oh, I make it very short because I think my colleagues know more about everything than I do. But for me, the most important thing is that we have the underlying cooperations between the different public authorities. I think we are here, the guests of North Westphalia. I think we are used to cooperate with 16 lenders, so we are 17 altogether and we just study. Then we have this on the European level, and we don't have only the member states, but we have the Commission. I would say the underlying is this way of cooperation, of common understanding, that we are all have the same goals, and that we only find, I think, common solutions, that we get majorities, and sometimes we decide unique. I would say this is the underlying principle, and the rest is for the universities and for all the other people doing their best at the ERC, at the universities and the university networks and so forth. I would say this, I think, is what really is needed for in Europe, and I think we have this to 90%, and the 10% we are working on every day.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I just pass on this question also to Professor Wolff? What is the key success factor for the European research area?
And we've been talking a lot about cooperation, coordination, and top-down governance, but maybe I can spend a line or two on competition as a mode of governance. And of course, we see a lot of competing for money, but competition can also be used, and regulated to become a means of governing systems for more success. And I've been greatly inspired by some publications from my PhD advisor, who was Arnold Picot, and he published books and papers in the 90s on the consequences of ICT on the shape and the governance of organizations. And one of his ideas was that we observe a trend towards more boundary-less organizations. And I think that has been pretty accurate. And we've seen big champions, basically governing and ruling world markets. And on the other hand, we've seen, new, small and volatile forms of corporations of very, very small or even self-employed economic, actors. So I'm wondering what the increase in use of ICT means to academia. The reason why science has not used ICT as its full potentials compared to businesses, I believe, is lack of market power and market pressure. Universities cannot make more money by using ICT more successfully, but now there's Corona, and now we've had the necessity to apply it, and that's why we've seen this huge, boom in actually applying technological means that we've had for many, many years already, but we have not used their full potential. So my feeling is that some universities will be very, very smart and create a greater networks or even, subsidiaries, new governance structures to use their brand name and their specific, their core competencies to, generate and disperse and use and certify, knowledge. And I think due to the ICT knowledge that we have all now gained and used during Corona, we'll see in the near future some new developments that some of us might not yet think of. And I think there'll be some parallels to the development in the corporate world after, they started using ICT.
Thank you very much. And I posed a question again as well to Mr. Paquet. If you've got anything where I think, okay, that is the key essence of making ERA successful.
I mean, there's one question from the audience on whether we need legislation. We have in the preparation of the policy paper, we have not ruled it out. We have also purposefully decided not to be too specific about it. But I must say, in the process which now opens, I would be really interested to see whether there will be member states or maybe the European Parliament or regional authorities which will recommend that. So that's certainly one part of the toolbox on which the treaty would allow to do more, if we so decide. And the other dimension is indeed on the governance, but here a rather general point, because I don't want to go too much into the specifics of the paper of Wednesday. But I think on governance, what would be really important is that we find a way to ensure that the momentum which is now visible, there is political momentum, there is ownership on the European research area agenda at level of ministers, maybe even above, and certainly many actors are now quite interested to reinvent the European research area. That is really very, very good, and I think out of that in the next couple of years, quite a bit can happen. Now, you also need a process where you can re-inject this political momentum, not every 20 years, but on a more regular basis. And this is, I think, one dimension of the governance, which I think is very important.
Thank you very much. I think just to add on this point, I think on the governance, the university sector is certainly going to be very interested to participate as well. Professor Bourguignon, if you have also one last reflection, very brief, on the key success factor for the implementation of ERA.
Well, the key factor for me will be not to despair the young generation. And this morning there was a press conference by the Initiative for Science in Europe organization with a representative of the young career researchers organizations. And it was clear that even now they have data showing that the number of them for which their work was so much perturbed that they are considering leaving, and in particular women over men. So I think we have to be very, very careful if there are not very specific initiatives taken to really compensate for this very special moment that we are living through, in particular in terms of job opportunities, extensions of jobs, more flexibility on delays on defending PhDs and so on. We are going to lose a generation, and that we cannot afford. I think this is very critical. And of course, this is all across the European research area. They are not a single discipline. Of course, the experimental ones are more hit than the others. If you are a theoretician, you can work at home. It's less damaging. But I think we all have a responsibility to make sure that this young generation is not hit even more. I mean, they pay a double price in a sense.
Very much. I think very, very important message also for the European research area. Thank you very much. So the last question before I hand over back to Berlin on one key success factor for the implementation of ERA. Also, I would like to ask basically our host, the German Länder, Ms. Bowen, what do you consider as the key success factor for the implementation of ERA?
I think a key could be a bottom-up approach to the ERA, and as I mentioned before, the community involvement in general. And as Mr. Bourguignon mentioned, and as I also said before, I think it's very important that there is a youth exchange and that we focus also on exchange programs, not only in scientific research as scientifics, but also in students and student exchange programs. Yes.
Thank you very much. And with this, I have to close this panel. I would like to really thank all the panelists in Berlin, in Schwerin, in Paris, and here in Brussels for this excellent and very exciting discussion. As I said, there's still many aspects to discover in ERA, but I think we've already had looked at it quite intensely with many aspects that will make ERA a success. So thank you very much also from my side for keeping this discussion very lively, with making my job very easy and also very enjoyable. And I hope as well that the audience has equally enjoyed this very engaging discussions. And with this, I hand back over to Berlin to Minister Pfeiffer-Poensgen for the closing of this conference.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Today's discussions on the European research area confirm the importance of the topic for the federal and state governments in Germany, but also for Europe. The debate about the task and future perspectives of European research and innovation policy was clearly overdue. With this conference, we are keen to kick off this debate, and who knows, we might even set an example and pave the way for more dialogue about key issues. Let me build on the main themes of today's event. The EU Framework Programme for Research and Innovation is at the center of European research policy. Over the past decades, the preparation and implementation of the Framework Programme, along with infighting over funding, has tied up more and more political energy and administrative capacities of EU institutions, member states and stakeholders, which in turn has made it harder to have a proper debate over the further development of European research policy. The renewal of the European research area must start from the basic idea that European research policy is not limited to a funding program. The ERA should rather be understood as a conceptual framework for the comprehensive and strategic strengthening of development opportunities for science and research within Europe. The Federal Council, the Bundesrat, is emphasizing that it considers the ERA to be a key contribution to European integration, which quite clearly points beyond the purely economic integration of European states. That is why the German states are welcoming the forthcoming Commission communication on the European research area. Scientific research needs to be adequately financed. In the European research area, the next framework program for research and innovation, Horizon Europe, is therefore of crucial importance. The German federal states are critical about the funding volume, as probably everybody knows, proposed by the European Council for Horizon Europe, and are calling for a notable increase of the budget to 120 billion euros. At the same time, the German federal states stress their view that any meaningful finance for the European research area must not be limited to the funding of individual projects. For that reason, the German federal states are expressly committed to the goal of increasing national spending on research and development to at least 3% of GDP. Europe's science and research sector hinges on universities, which are the operators of research, education, innovation, and culture, and therefore the key elements of the European research area. Still, their role should not be limited to participation in the European university networks. By reflecting European variety and diversity, there are kind of a transmission belt for the implementation of the European research area. That is why ERA revitalization must go hand in hand with efforts to strengthen the university positions in the European research area. The successful design of the European research area depends largely on the extent to which people and institutions can be involved on site. Tangible participation schemes are needed. The federal states advocate designing the funding and support formats for the implementation of project ideas and transfer plans in a European context in a diverse and variable manner. We also advocate, in contrast to the Commission and the German Council presidency, not to focus solely on overarching initiatives and large consortia. It will also be necessary to do the same to create low threshold funding schemes for research and innovation. The European research area needs to be a venue for open scientific exchange. This calls for a high degree of mobility of the players as scientific knowledge processes are carried out by researchers rather than institutions. Therefore, the European research area must be designed to foster exchange from formats that are characterized by greater flexibility and less red tape. Measures to improve mobility should also include administrative staff at universities and research institutions, which, in the opinion of the German federal states, requires increasing financial resources for the European mobility promotion programs. Excellence and widening in the European research area should not be played off against each other. That is why we propose to openly address the charged relationship between the two and to identify possible ways to resolve it. On this point, we see similarities with the Commission's political priorities. Research excellence and outstanding scientific performance should continue to be aim and characteristic of the European research area. In addition, the ERA must also strive for a Europe-wide development of scientific diversity, creativity, originality, and open knowledge evolution, which is fed from as many sources as possible. It is therefore essential to reduce the currently unequal participation of different regions in research and innovation. In order to offer all scientists within the EU fair opportunities to participate, the European research area should specifically promote administrative capacities and research policy competencies in regions that have so far been less research intensive. This would create the conditions for extended participation in funding programs and associations in the European research area. We had an interesting discussion about our fundamental values of freedom of science, of research and of speech, and the danger of political mission-driven research. I just can indicate the subject top-down research versus bottom-up research, not to forget the competition, which I think is very important too. And important is when we are talking about the era, looking inside Europe, don't underestimate China, as we heard from Monsieur Bourguignon. I'm convinced that we have taken an important step in the right direction today, and I can assure that the German federal states will continue to closely monitor, mentor, and support the development of the European research area. We are therefore delighted that the European Commission has given the regions an important role in shaping the European research area. Finally, I would like to recommend you all to read our position paper on which all the German Länder have agreed. Many thanks again to all the participants who have actively contributed to today's event, and also to those taking part online. Thank you very much, you all, and a lot of success. Thank you.